I should say that the talk has a subtitle, which is How I Learned to Love the Flood, because as you'll see, the imagery of the flood and Noah's Ark is very central to a lot of the topics that we've been discussing so far. So, yeah, I mean, it's a particular pleasure to be speaking at this point in the conference when so many of the themes that I'm going to be treating have already been touched on. So I do feel that I'm fitting right into the flood of knowledge that's been unleashed. It was an ancient method of teaching the mysteries to present fragments of information, not necessarily in the right order, not necessarily in a way that you would appreciate at first listening, and to overcome the obstacles in the environment to the reception of that knowledge was a part of the initiatory way. So in the time available, I can only really give you the building materials and a sketch of the plan of the work. It's for you to create your blueprints and to discover how to work the stone, to be both the architect and the master builder. And to do this, we're going to work with some very powerful and beautiful images from the Hermetic tradition. In the Western culture, words and ideas are often regarded as primary, information. But in the mysteries, in the magical traditions, the image, the imagination, often regarded as more important than what the logical mind can decode of them and put into ordinary words. So in many ways, this talks some reflections on a collection of key images put together by past students of the eternal knowledge, our counterparts 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And by doing that, we really take our place in the river of the recovery of the tradition. So I've already had some audience feedback. This is indeed an image of the Temple of Solomon, which became in the Jewish and then the Christian tradition a great symbol of how high cultural products can be destroyed, can be lost, but if the knowledge of its design, its proportions, and what it meant and was for is preserved, it can be rebuilt, it can be regenerated. There's an endless symbolism in the idea of a temple, a ruined temple, still speaks of what it was for and what is meant to be. Freemasonry speaks of the lost word. Christianity speaks of the word that was made flesh. But St. John says the world, through whom, and everything in the world is made through the word. The world didn't know the word when the word came in full power. There's a deep irony in here. The Greek philosophers, perhaps a little bit more helpfully, spoke of the body as being the temple of the soul, the temple of the spirit, or the tomb. So there was a pun the Greek philosophers used to use, which was the soma, the body, is also a sema, i.e. a tomb or temple. And that really opens the game wide open because, well, we know this really, but this is the meaning of life. So let's, at this time in the day, useful to remember how we came to be here and the essence of our existence. It's very simple. The old story goes something like this. In the beginning, in the timeless beginning, the one reality is, we can't really say was, and the one reality wanted there to be existence. God doesn't exist, didn't exist. So if an atheist tells you God doesn't exist, you're on firm grounds of agreeing wholeheartedly. God doesn't exist, God is. But God wanted existence to be. But all there was God. So God poured forth or allowed there to be existence. And this was matter. This was all of the potential of what could be from a stone to an archangel to a galaxy. All this came into being through the one reality making matter. Now this, in a sense, was a sacrifice. Christianity speaks of the lamb that was slain before the foundations of the world. You get the same idea in Vedic teachings like we heard yesterday, that the Purusha was sacrificed. You get similar ideas in Norse mythology, that all it is came into being through the sacrifice of the original oneness that poured out its light into the matter it had made. And in simple terms, this means you make your bed and you have to lie in it. The one being wanted there to be a world, and what that meant was suffering. Crucifixion is the correct term in Christian mysticism. And yet, from that death, from that entrapment in matter, the conditions we created, comes resurrection. Like the shell that remains when the snail has gone, you could say that matter shows the spirit that formed it and that gets trapped in it and can then be released when the form dies. And a new form will be built. You can see it in reincarnation. You can see it in the changing of epochs. This primal symbolism of form and matter is what this symbol of Solomon's Temple is really all about. And perhaps the second point to make about that is what is true of the whole universe is also true of the human body, and it's also true of a temple or tomb, and it's also true of language or a letter. So anything I'm saying about words is also true of the body, is also true of the universe. Useful to bear in mind. So, all right, the ancient wisdom. Well, what is it? It's very hard to get a concise description of the wisdom, one of the reasons being that most students who studied it in depth swore oaths of secrecy about it in our traditions. So here's a quote I picked almost at random from Cicero, the philosopher and politician who was also an initiate. I shall say nothing of that sacred and august Eleusinia, into whose mysteries the most distant nations were initiated, nor of the solemnities in Samothrace or in Lemnos, secretly resorted to by night and surrounded by thick and shady groves, which, if they were properly explained and reduced to reasonable principles, would rather explain the nature of things than discover the knowledge of gods. Now, that does make the important point that if you were a student of the mysteries, then as now, you weren't just told the old stories about the gods and the myths, you were taught science, you were taught philosophy. It does create the false idea that the mysteries were a proto-science which dispensed with religion. No, much more correct to say the mysteries had a unified view of life which explained religion, science, art, and everything in one ageless and eternal truth. This is a famous illustration from Robert Flood's famous Utrius Cosmoque. It's called the Divine Monochord, and it obviously shows very clearly the view of the cosmos as a oneness from the heights, the highest harmonies, if you like, to the depths. So you can see at the bottom the four elements, and then you have the planets, and then you have the realms beyond the planetary. Now, some of you may have been asking yourself this weekend, I know I have, why should I believe in the ancient wisdom? These are beautiful ideas, but I need more conviction. One beginning is that the ancient wisdom is like the trunk from which all other sciences you could imagine branch out. If the ancient wisdom, the unifying truths, were not true, everything else we believe would fall apart. And the great symbol of the teacher of that unified truth was Hermes Trismegistus. I saw a wonderful image in the last presentation of Hermes with this similar hat like that on. You see him with his normal iconography. He's got the little model of the world. Hermes is said to have a threefold knowledge of the cosmos. There's the double serpented caduceus. There's the Greek name for God, Theos, in the top. And one early modern scientist, philosopher, who had a very deep understanding of Hermes and Hermeticism was Francis Bacon. Not Roger Bacon, who we were hearing about before, but Francis Bacon. He wrote a wonderful argument for science and learning to King James, and his praise, his flattery of James. He was trying to get James to invest a lot of money into universities and science so that what we know of science could come about. Didn't quite happen in James's reign. His plan was picked up in Charles II's reign and became the Royal Society.